Hello interwebs, I hope you're all doing well, especially for this video that I'm going to be going through today. Like, quite literally, this is the type of video that you get when you set a neurodivergent transgender nerd down a really dark alt-right rabbit hole. And yes, that is a warning to let you all know that this is going to get really dark. On top of that, this will also be a video that will directly call out harmful reporting and actions by numerous organizations and people, including, notably, given that I'm a YouTuber, a fellow and much more prominent YouTuber than I am right on this very platform. And what's messed up about all of this is that this was a video that I didn't intend to make. This video that you're watching right now was initially written and began as a minor 5-minute section for my upcoming video that I'm doing on right-wing Daily Wire host and noted walrus disliker Matt Walsh's documentary, What is a Woman? A video in which I will be directly breaking down all the misinformation that Matt Walsh used throughout the movie, as well as showcase how the film is actually meant to be something much darker than simple misinformation about trans people. However, that video will be coming soon, and I'll explain why it's taking so long at the end of this video, so be prepared for that. It's some personal stuff behind the scenes, so apologies on that front. But as part of writing that video, I found a story that I couldn't not continue to investigate, because it was important to make sure that if I was going to feature this story in the video, that I really fully looked into it. But as I dug deeper and deeper into this story, it became about so much more than just Matt Walsh's film. It has allegations of sexual abuse and drug trafficking, as well as discussing reporting by outlets like Fox News and Matt Walsh, and, as I alluded to earlier, fellow YouTuber Blaire White. Honestly, angering and shocking stuff about everyone involved. And I don't say that to be hyperbolic or to keep you watching the video. I say that to really give you a warning. This video will be controversial, so much so that I actually had a lawyer friend read over it to ensure I did the best I could to get my wording right and to be as accurate as I possibly could, considering the things that I'm going to say. But even more so, beyond just this specific story, I wanted to use this tale to talk about and examine how right-wing groups create and generate misinformation. The pipeline that they use to give seeming validity to discredit and attack marginalized groups and people. A pipeline that literally generates itself all the way up to folks like Tucker Carlson, one of the top right-wing news shows in the world. So, all of that said, let's get into it, and I cannot make this more clear right up front. Huge content warning for this video for things like transphobia and sexual abuse. That all being said, let's talk about Eli Erlick. If the name Eli Erlick sounds familiar to you, it's possibly because you may have heard about her being discussed by both Matt Walsh and Blaire White recently here on YouTube, where both discussed alleged sexual abuses by her, which we'll get to in just a little bit. But if you don't watch those folks, it is possible that you still heard of her from me myself, because I actually talked about Eli earlier in my first video on What is a Woman by Matt Walsh. In that video, I mentioned that Eli is a 27-year-old transgender activist who has gained a lot of accolades and attention throughout recent years. She came out as transgender at a very young age while still living in rural California, where she experienced harassment, isolation, and bullying as a result, as well as parents who initially did not support her transition. Eventually, she did transition and eventually even got several gender confirmation surgeries, including vaginoplasty, which I mentioned not to be over-obsessed with someone's genitals because we all know that that's a really big problem when discussing trans people and our surgeries, but because she has been open about the fact that she has got that surgery, as well as the fact what genitalia she has will sadly become relevant later. Now, I want to be clear up front what we're eventually going to get to in this video so that all of you know what we're going to be discussing as we go forward. Eli, despite her work, has been accused of sexual abuse, rape, and drug trafficking, as well as more. But how is that true? How is that all possible for a trans activist like her? And why is it just coming up now? Well, that's what we're going to be exploring in this video. The pipeline from those stories to how they got to the mainstream and where these stories come from and if they actually have validity or not. Moving on though, Eli has worked as an organizer and activist for most of her life, notably co-founding the organization Trans Student Educational Resources, which has grown to become one of the world's most prominent transgender organizations and the only national organization run by transgender youth. While most of you probably have not heard of TSER directly, many within the transgender community have seen some of their work in the form of the popular Gender Unicorn, which is an absolutely adorable and fantastic tool meant to help transgender youth, and really all youth in general, think and conceptualize gender. It's meant to be a teaching tool. This Gender Unicorn is where Eli first intersects with Matt Walsh, who I mentioned earlier is currently a right-wing host on the Daily Wire. However, Walsh wrote about Eli when he worked at Blaze Media, the conservative news website founded by Glenn Beck. Yeah, anyone still remember Glenn Beck? Is he still a thing?
If you want to do pot, that's great, but I ain't giving you any health care.
While at Blaze Media, Walsh wrote a story that called the Gender Unicorn, quote, the weird drug-induced nightmares of a mentally deranged pedophile. And that the unicorn was somehow indoctrinating kids, quote, into pagan superstitions and preyed upon psychologically abusive predators who wish to pollute their minds and rob their innocence and their moral sanity. Which, is a lot to say about a fucking unicorn. I mean, this unicorn apparently works for the Dark Brandon agenda. A lot of other conservative media pundits at the time did things like calling this unicorn communist brainwashing for it being used in schools to help teach kids about gender identity. Hello, comrade unicorn. You are making a great mission to gender all American kids and give them sparkles for great communist leaders. Glitter shall soon hail down on all capitalist pigs, and they shall not be able to remove it from the clogs of their engines of endless production. Now, as should be quite obvious by the hyperbolicized way that they were writing about it, many conservative writers, including Walsh, were misrepresenting how the unicorn was being introduced and used in schools, saying that it was being pushed on children to try to indoctrinate them into communism or whatever, instead of what it was, a teaching tool being used by some school districts in a way to help kids understand and articulate how they feel about gender and sexual orientation. Yet, to many folks in conservative media who think discussing gender beyond the ideas of boys tough and girls soft is somehow indoctrinating children, or that sexual orientation is somehow unfamily friendly, despite the fact that every children's book features some sort of princess marrying a prince, this gender unicorn represents the fall of Western society, apparently.
They saw teachers in middle schools, in elementary schools, sometimes even preschools, presenting kids with sexual classroom materials, such as the Gender Unicorn.
There's evil afoot.
What evil?
And many of Walsh's followers have continued to vilify this poor unicorn to this day. I literally, coincidentally, like the week that I wrote this script, had an anti-transgender Twitter account tweet at me about a tweet that I made about J.K. Rowling or whatever, and the tweet right before that was about the scary gender unicorn. Now, the reason I mention all of this and talk a lot about this gender unicorn is to showcase that Matt Walsh and a lot of conservative media have a history of talking about TSER and Eli specifically in very misinformed ways, as well as a history of misrepresenting and hyperbolicizing all transgender issues, which What Is a Woman as a film and much of Walsh's channel today, and let's just face it, a lot of conservative media in general, is just a continuation of. However, Walsh's experience with Eli, as well as her well-known work continuing to this day, is probably what led to the next step in the story. As I discussed in my first video on Walsh, Eli accused Walsh of seeking interviews for What Is a Woman under false pretenses, with Walsh's producer, McKenna Lynn Walters, creating a fake gender unity project and misrepresenting herself and the documentary as a self-funded post-college graduate student film project to Eli, which the movie most clearly was not, given that it was being funded by the Daily Wire. And she and Walsh did this in order to get Eli and other prominent trans people to appear in the movie without knowing what the movie actually was. Eli was one of many reached out to by Walsh, most likely in an attempt to get footage of her in the film in order to manipulate it to make her look silly or take her words out of context. This was a practice that Walsh uses throughout the film that I already discussed in my first video on the movie. That is already out right now. Now, lest you say, well, this was one person making this accusation against Walsh and McKenna Lynn Walters. So how do we actually know it's true? Can we actually trust Eli in her statements about the film? Well, since I did that first video discussing Eli's accusations, Other prominent trans people have come forward with similar stories of the lies and misrepresentations they got from Walsh's team about the film. For example, Fallon Fox, a transgender MMA fighter who has been the subject of right-wing anti-trans scrutiny to further anti-trans women in sports narratives, was also reached out to by McKenna. Fox publicly shared DMs that she had with McKenna very recently, which shows that McKenna disingenuously talked to Fox, saying things like she wanted to make the documentary after meeting a trans person that she worked with at JCPenney, as well as constantly complimenting and buttering up Fox in order to get her to appear in the film. So here we see McKenna utilizing the words and experiences of an ally of the trans community in order to lie to someone to coerce them into a film which they wouldn't have done if given the ability to have informed consent about it. So kind of fucked up on Matt Walsh's team's part. But what this clearly shows is it's not just Eli making these accusations. Still, Eli was the first to come out with this revelation and one of the most prominent to do so before the film was actually finished filming, and as a result did stop several trans people from appearing in Walsh's film, which certainly couldn't have made Walsh particularly happy. Now, the reason that I put Fallon Fox's corroboration of Eli's accusations into this video is because Eli's credibility was recently attacked by Walsh and other conservatives. In early August 2022, Matt Walsh started posting videos about Eli on his YouTube channel and discussing her on his show. At first glance, given Walsh's history with Eli, these videos seem to be a direct retaliation by Walsh for Eli exposing his documentary's terrible behind-the-scenes practices, aiming to discredit her accusations and overall credibility in order to showcase that he didn't do anything wrong with the documentary filmmaking. Indeed, while Walsh doesn't mention Eli's relationship to his film in his videos on her, a fact that conveniently allows him to not discuss the accusations nor his conflict of interest in discussing Eli in front of his audience, the fact that he's focusing on Eli is almost certainly no coincidence. As is often the case when activists speak up about right-wing attacks or misinformation campaigns, Eli sadly brought attention upon herself by these groups, which led to added scrutiny by Walsh and other right-wing groups like Libs of TikTok. However, beyond this surface-level self-serving nature of the topic on Walsh's part and his lack of disclosure of his involvement with Eli in his discussions about her, Walsh does seemingly have credible and honestly rather shocking accusations to level against Eli, as he alleges her of illegally trafficking drugs to minors.
Erlick excitedly told 40,000 plus followers about a brilliant plan to circumvent state laws banning doctors from prescribing hormones to gender-confused minors. Erlick's genius scheme, which was laid out in strenuous detail and remained published on Instagram for nearly 3 months before Libs of TikTok finally noticed it and reposted it to Twitter. The scheme was to gather leftover prescription hormone pills and mail them to anyone who wants them. No questions asked, we're told. All of this is illegal. It is, in fact, so illegal that it would be impossible for me to count all the laws that it breaks. It is illegal to share your prescription medication with anyone who it was not prescribed for. It is illegal to facilitate the exchange of other people's prescription drugs. It is illegal to ship controlled substances through the mail. It is illegal to distribute drugs across state lines. It is illegal to send them to other countries. All of these drugs are illegal for anyone who is not a doctor or pharmacist to distribute, period. And for good reason. The substances being shipped across the country by Erlick's ragtag group of drug peddlers are dangerous, potent, laden with potentially severe side effects, and they make irreversible changes to your body. In participating in this scheme, not just participating, but organizing it, Erlick has violated dozens of state laws, federal laws, and international laws, making the perp here eligible for decades in federal prison.
So these do seem like very over-the-top hyperbolic accusations leveled against Eli by someone who has a history of doing so. But when I began to look into this, we do find that Matt does have many of his facts correct here. Eli, both in an Instagram post that Libs of TikTok channel surfaced and in a YouTube video, did, hypothetically, discuss a plan and desire to share transgender hormones like estradiol, spironolactone, and testosterone to transgender youth in areas where transgender healthcare for trans youth has been outlawed.
Every month, for the past several years, I've ordered a double dose of hormones and testosterone blockers. I save all the extra pills for my best friends, my closest lovers, and my worst enemies. I have the opportunity to give life-saving medication to people who need it, and it basically costs me nothing. A few months ago, I posted on Instagram asking for testosterone for a friend who actually already had a prescription. His doctor was out of town and he couldn't get a new one. Within hours, my story was taken down and I received a warning by the administrators. Now, of course, I know it's against Instagram rules to share substances, and I wasn't particularly surprised that it was removed. But I was still upset. So yeah, I know it's illegal, duh. So was changing my social security to female without medical treatment. So was crossing the street outside my apartment instead of using the crosswalk.
And as Matt notes, the hypothetical part of Eli's videos is probably there just to give the ability for these videos to not be technically self-incrimination, because sharing drugs in this way is illegal. Testosterone, for example, is a Schedule III controlled substance in the United States, meaning that only a prescribing doctor and pharmacist can give it to someone. So Walsh is absolutely correct that if Eli is doing this, this is a potentially illegal activity. However, there are a few nuances about that Matt Walsh is leaving out. First and foremost is the fact that what is legal and what is right are not always the same thing. Gay marriage, for example, was also illegal, but it was immoral to make it so. Abortion right now is illegal in many states in the United States, which many would also say is absolutely immoral, including myself. Not to mention a former legal yet definitely immoral thing called, slavery. It's also illegal for me to constantly DM Jack Quaid at all hours of the day, sharing with him my Star Trek Lower Decks theories about Boimler's real hair color. Oh, sorry, no, that one's actually not illegal. That one's just really annoying, I'm sure. And also probably immoral. Anyways, my tonally dissonant jokes aside, moving on, another nuance we could talk about is why certain trans hormones are so regulated in the first place. Testosterone, for example, was only made a Schedule III controlled substance in 1990 due to Ronald Reagan's war on drugs, as well as concerns about sports steroid usages, and not due to its usage specifically in medical context, and especially for trans people. Comparatively, hormones like estradiol for trans women are not under as strict regulations. Yet even beyond just these drugs specifically, we could also talk about the nuances of the totality of the transgender medical care discussion going on right now. Or more accurately, the lack of nuance in the discussion. The recent outlawing of healthcare for trans youth in numerous states in the US is often built upon lies and misrepresentation about what trans healthcare for youth is.
Very young kids getting gender-affirming care. They don't tell you what that is.
There's evil afoot. Evil! Where is it? There it is!
Right-wing groups like Matt Walsh himself will often say things like irreversible trans-affirming surgeries are being given to children with nary a barrier in sight, that they just can walk in one day and get the surgery easily.
I'll tell you one thing we're going to see, and we're already starting to see now, and it's only going to get worse. Mass suicide epidemic among these kids who we have taken, and when I say we, I mean society, has taken and forced an identity crisis onto them, and completely, from the youngest ages, completely morphed and deformed their concept of themselves, and put them on a path towards destroying and rejecting their own bodies.
Or that hormones like estrogen are being pumped into transgender kids' veins so that they look like a transgender Bane.
So my ex-wife brings my child into BC Children's Hospital. I get a call less than an hour into that appointment is that they were going to pump her full of cross-sex hormones within the hour. And I put a halt to that. I said no.
Incidentally, this makes Batman and Robin's Bane a transgender icon, and we will cherish him. Now, obviously none of that is true, and there is a ton of nuance to discuss when it comes to trans healthcare and how to do it safely, properly, and well. But none of these laws that are being made against trans healthcare are based in any of that nuance, just the fear-mongering and transgender scapegoating culture war nonsense that has defined a lot of right-wing rhetoric over the past few months and years. I've already made that case throughout multiple videos that I've done on this channel, and will yet again make it in my next video on Matt Walsh's film. However, to give you a quick example of how this misinformation from right-wing groups about trans healthcare works, take, for example, how the Daily Wire recently posted a story that Matt Walsh himself shared on his Twitter in late August of 2022 that linked the puberty-blocking drug Lupron that has been given to transgender kids in some instances was linked to thousands of deaths, 6,300 to be exact, according to the FDA. This story makes it sound like thousands of transgender kids were being killed by puberty-blocking drugs and that thousands and potentially even more were in danger of being killed. Except, if you look into the story, the drug is also given to terminally ill cancer patients who are fighting hormone-sensitive cancers like prostate cancer, and that those thousands of deaths reported by the FDA are likely them, not transgender youth. This is a fact that the Daily Wire story deliberately leaves out of its reporting, thereby vilifying transgender healthcare to its right-wing audience that reads it, who won't get the full context of the story. These types of infuriating misinformation and selective disregard for facts are exactly what laws outlining transgender healthcare has built momentum upon, and it leaves thousands of trans youth and trans people generally unable to access needed medical care in those areas. For example, as a transgender woman on hormones, if I lived in an area that took away my ability to get estrogen, which I use fairly regularly, I would be in a serious medical danger, as going off of estrogen at this point can cause me severe healthcare risks. And for all transgender youth, proper healthcare under the direction of doctors, therapists, and affirming guardians can also improve their lives immeasurably, and has been consistently shown to reduce mental health issues, depression, and suicidal thoughts, among many other benefits. As a result, many, myself included, would argue that these laws in these areas are both unjust, misinformed, and wrong. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, that laws and moral correctness are not exactly correlated. And keep in mind how this type of reporting works, because it's going to be the subject of the entirety of the latter half of this video. That being said, though, there is a reason that drugs are controlled and that it's illegal to share some of them, and I totally get that. However, when a marginalized group's healthcare has been outlawed based on misinformation and access to essential drugs for them is hard to get, it's not morally wrong to share those drugs. Many activists throughout many communities and decades work to share medicines with those who need them, but for which care has been made difficult, too financially unviable, or illegal. For example, many abortion activists, both today in a post-Roe v. Wade world and in a pre-Roe v. Wade world, seek to get both abortion access and abortion medications to those in areas where abortion is and was illegal. Further, many LGBTQ folks during the 70s, 80s, and 90s HIV epidemic would share experimental but reasonably safe drugs for HIV, as those drugs were restricted to only a few who could get access to it at the time. Stories like that were recently dramatized in the Emmy-nominated TV show Pose, where we saw in that series a trans woman in an experimental drug trial share her pills with a fellow HIV-positive friend, potentially saving or at least extending their life.
He told me not to worry, that he had some new medication for me. He said he had to hook up with the doctors in the trial. So I've been going to his place every week for the past 2 months. He always got more for me. Didn't really make sense that the doctors would just give him extra pills, but the spot went away. And I got strong again, so I let it go. Figure he's just swiping it from the trial.
There's no way he could have swiped anything. And those doctors at the hospital, there's no way in hell they're going to give anybody an extra dose.
Further, activist groups like ACT UP fought for these drugs to be given wider distribution, helping to save lives. Queer folks at the time would also share pamphlets about healthcare and safe sex information during the epidemic. And this growing awareness of healthcare within the LGBTQ community still has effects today, with the queer community being one of the main communities affected by the recent increase in monkeypox cases. Some reports have shown that the queer community's history of healthcare awareness out of the AIDS crisis has led to many more people getting vaccinated within those communities, as well as giving them greater inclination to listen to healthcare professionals about monkeypox and spreading safe sex information within their community as a result. I say all this to say that there is a long history of activism among both queer and other marginalized communities of sharing inaccessible healthcare resources to those in need of them, regardless of what the laws are. And this is a tradition in which Eli Erlick is potentially, I say potentially there, continuing. That being said, these laws restricting transgender healthcare and access to medications do create these black markets for drugs that exclude doctors from the process. Usually and preferably, puberty blockers or hormones are given and overseen by a doctor who knows a patient's hormone levels, medical history, allergies, and more. So making these drugs illegal robs transgender people of getting that insight and increases the risk of these medications being taken on their own without a doctor. And this is sadly something that Eli cannot fix. And while her potentially giving medications can help give drugs to trans folks who need them and can't get them otherwise, it's a band-aid on a gaping wound. It is better than nothing, but it is also dangerous and creates its own added risk. One worth it for many trans people, but one that shouldn't exist in the first place. It's the same thing you see with abortions. Making abortions illegal doesn't reduce the need for abortions, but it does increase the number of unsafe and risky abortions as some people are unable to get proper care. These bans on trans youth healthcare also lead to drug prices to increase for those trying to get it on the black market, as people don't have insurances to pay for them. So they have to get them from out of state or from sellers who can jack up the prices without regulation. This means that those of lower income are more adversely affected than those with higher incomes, who can often work better around localized and discriminatory laws. And this is something that, at least, Eli is, hypothetically, trying to negate by giving these drugs free where she can. Let me try explaining this another way in case that doesn't work for you. Imagine if a medication you need, like insulin for diabetics, suddenly became illegal. Are you suddenly going to stop taking insulin just because someone you never met said that it was illegal? No, you aren't. And despite all the vilification and misinformation surrounding trans care that's out there, this all really comes down to something as simple as that, when we're talking about transgender people trying to get medications that have been made illegal based on misinformation and outright just lies about what it means to get these medications. So I go through all that to say that Eli's alleged work, is it illegal? Yes. Is it dangerous? Potentially. Is it wrong? No. At least not definitively so. But of course, going back to Matt Walsh, he doesn't know any of that nuance surrounding Eli's drug work. Instead, simply calling her a drug trafficker and a child groomer and calling on his followers to try to contact the DEA on Eli for her actions.
Now, I doubt that you're the country's most prolific illegal distributor of prescription drugs, but you are the one that we're going to make an example of, because we have to start somewhere. Also, Eli, I should note that I just don't like your attitude. I think you need some humility in your life. And I am generous enough to help you develop that virtue. So, here's what's going to happen. I want anyone concerned about this criminal activity to do the responsible thing and report it to the relevant authorities. If you see something, say something. How many times have we been told that? And let's start with the DEA. You can easily find the link on Google, but here is the URL. We'll put it up on the screen for you. DEA.gov/submit-tip. From there, you can submit a tip, either anonymously or not. It's up to you. And you can note that there is someone by the name of Eli Erlick who has announced an intention to participate in the illegal distribution of prescription drugs across the country.
And again, he's done this because he's already successfully argued to his followers that drugs for trans youth are inherently harmful, predatory, and evil, as well as on top of having stoked pre-existing transphobic prejudices in his audience of trans people being child predators that he's pushed in numerous narratives throughout many videos and segments that he's solely devoted to discussing trans people in that way.
This is what parents have to worry about now, that their children will, in secret, begin to medically transition with the help of drugs they obtained through Instagram.
As a result, Walsh generated and created a hate mob that gleefully tries to ruin Eli's life because this action has already been framed as a binary moral good to them, despite his audience never stopping to question the nuances of why Eli is doing any of this in the first place.
We're not finished. Erlick, despite not understanding math, statistics, the law, or for that matter, human biology, is a PhD candidate at the University of California, Santa Cruz. The university ought to know and ought to act upon the fact that one of their PhDs is an admitted drug trafficker. So yesterday I reached out personally to the chancellor of the university, Cynthia K. Larive, to ask her about this matter, and I haven't heard back yet. Now, I'm going to give her the rest of today to respond and to explain what steps are being taken to address this very troubling situation. But if I still cannot get a hold of her after today, then it will be my duty and responsibility as a citizen to share the publicly available contact information for the university administration and encourage all of my thousands of listeners and viewers and the millions who follow me on social media to call and email demanding that the university take action.
But all this is par for the course on how Walsh and many right-wing groups wield their audiences to harass trans people and transgender healthcare and transgender activists. If you want a less morally ambiguous example of that, take, for example, how recently libs of TikTok and Matt Walsh vilified children's hospitals. Literally children's hospitals, by lying about trans-affirming care that those hospitals give, saying that they were giving out hormones and surgeries like hysterectomies to under 10-year-old kids, which they weren't.
Children's hospitals around the country are butchering, mutilating, and sterilizing their young patients. So according to Boston Children's Hospital, literally every toddler who has ever been born or will ever be born is trans. Now, if it seems like they're casting the widest imaginable net in order to catch the most children they can and put them all on a path to sterilization and butchery before they can even talk, well, that's because that's exactly what these monsters are doing. And they've done it up until this moment without much resistance from the public. But that has to end. We have to stop making it so easy on them. And that's why I'm in the very early stages of trying to organize a national coordinated effort to fight back against this evil. It's really just a matter of where do we begin? Maybe we begin at Boston Children's Hospital.
These hospitals just had trans-affirming healthcare centers where they helped trans kids with therapy or puberty blockers, as well as maybe getting them access to things like surgery and stuff like that at an older age. These lies about these children's hospitals, though, led to the children's hospitals' websites being attacked, and their staff being harassed both online and in real life, and them being sent death threats. Death threats to people working at children's hospitals.
Boston Children's Hospital says its staff is being threatened and harassed now after far-right activists on social media posted misinformation, claiming they perform gender-affirming hysterectomy procedures on young girls. The hospital says it's not true. They do not perform those procedures for anyone under the age of 18. Boston Children's Hospital says it is proud, though, to be home to the first pediatric and adolescent transgender health program in the United States. The hospital, though, now is working with law enforcement to try to better protect its staff in the face of these lies.
These harassments and attacks endanger not only these practitioners, again, giving healthcare to children, and not only endangers transgender kids, but all of the children receiving care at these hospitals. And it's frankly disgusting. And the vilification of Eli's work is just another example of it. While the morality of her work can certainly be argued, and I certainly by no means wish to say that it's an easy black or white moral good, there's more to it than simply calling Eli a child-grooming drug trafficker that Matt Walsh hyperbolically framed her as in his videos. So everything that I've talked about up until this point just clearly shows that Matt Walsh often works to misinform his audience about not only transgender activists like Eli, but has a history of creating misinformation around transgender issues and people and care, and is willing, like many right-wing folks, to wield that misinformation to attack transgender people, transgender children, as well as transgender activists as well. So this is the man that all of these things have been built up upon. However, there is one more element, and the thing that I'm going to spend the rest of this video discussing that Matt Walsh brings up that needs to be mentioned. And these are accusations against Eli that are less easily dismissed. Because you see, Matt Walsh briefly mentions in his video on Eli, as well as in articles that he shared on his Twitter, that Eli is accused of being a sexual abuser. Now, before we dig into the allegations themselves, it's important to note how these allegations were brought up by Walsh.
Now, it should be noted, for what it's worth, that Erlick was slightly less excited to embrace the label accused sexual abuser, threatening to sue me for libel when I reposted reports from other outlets noting that Erlick has, along with being a confessed drug smuggler, has indeed been accused of sexual assault by multiple alleged victims. And that's a fact. That's the news there. That's the accusation has been made. I don't know if it's true or not, but there was the accusations. So I suppose we can add the law to the list of things this person does not begin to understand.
It's clear that Walsh is offhandedly mentioning these accusations as a way to further instill distrust around Eli to his audience, as well as build his case that she is indeed a sexual degenerate, which fits his pre-existing framework of how he vilifies transgender people in general, as well as transgender healthcare, which he considers to be child grooming. So it's important to note that Matt Walsh isn't bringing up these allegations out of solidarity or in support of the alleged and supposed victims, but as a way to attack Eli specifically. So there is a direct intent behind using these allegations, rather than a desire to get to the truth of the matter. And we can even see how disingenuous his bringing up of the allegations are, even in small ways. For example, in that clip, he mentioned to his audience that Eli threatened to, quote, sue him for libel after he shared the article, which in fact was not the case. Eli tweeted in response to Walsh a refutation of the information in the article. Someone then responded to Eli that she should sue for libel, which he then said, quote, truly tempting, this is absurd. Not really a credible threat as Matt Walsh makes it out to be. But we see how Matt frames this small tweet exchange as if Eli literally yelled at him threatening to sue him right there. It's a small thing, and ultimately small potatoes in the grand scheme of what we're going to be talking about, but it's a clear example of Matt doing everything he can to distort the truth in order to frame the person he is discussing, Eli in this case, as actively aggressive and harmful to his audience. It's a small example of something he ultimately is attempting to do on a much larger scale. However, that doesn't really matter because if these allegations are real, they would seem to lend credence to his case, and it's something that we need to get to the bottom of. So, let's look into them. But before we start discussing that, I do have a few things that I need to mention. In order to talk about the allegations themselves, we first need to wade through the issues of how these sexual allegations were reported, because there are a ton of problems with how these allegations were reported and initially investigated. I am saying that up front though because I want to be very, very clear that I am not doing that in order to, in the end, wholesale dismiss these claims of abuse. But I do so actually to conversely be better able to focus on them after we've waded through all of the bullshit. I want to be very, very clear that I am going to take these allegations with every bit of seriousness that they deserve. And I say that because I, as someone who has also been a victim of sexual harm, and I am not going to talk about that in this video, nor in probably any of my videos, because that is a private matter for myself, as well as knowing the fact that there are many in my audience who have also dealt with stuff like this in their own lives. I want you to know that I am not trying to be dismissive in any way of these allegations. I am going to take these real claims of abuse deeply and deadly seriously. So please, if any of you out there are worried that I'm here to try to dismiss or try to defend a potential sexual abuser, know that that is not my intent or goal with this. I want you to know that this is absolutely a safe space for you, and if you can't watch the rest of this video because of the subject matter, I totally understand. Please take care of yourself. Believe me, let's just say it was not easy for me either. And I also want to let you know that even though I haven't been making a lot of jokes throughout this video already, I'm not going to be really joking throughout the rest of this because this is going to be some really hard stuff. Okay, that being said, let us talk first about the reporting of these allegations. First and foremost, several outlets have reported on these allegations against Eli Erlick. Since this is YouTube, I assume most of you watching this video probably heard them from YouTuber Blaire White, who recently did a video on Eli for her Transgender Predator series on her channel.
Welcome back to my channel. We are gathered here today to drag the ever-living out of a disgusting ass, predatory ass, loser ass, dumpster juice ass, bottom of the barrel ass trans activist named Eli Erlick.
Now, I'm not going to get into Blaire White as a YouTuber yet in this video, but we will return to her at the end. But for now, it is important just to note that White has reported on these claims of abuse, but they've also been mentioned in an article on Fox News, as well as Matt Walsh, like I said, referencing them earlier. So this showcases that these allegations are widely reported on some of the biggest platforms and news organizations around. And I say biggest platforms because Blaire White does have 1 million subscribers to her channel. All of that does seem to lend the allegations a lot of credence and validity. However, if you look into all of those reportings, each and every one of them seem to cite a specific single article from the website Redux as the source of the reporting on these allegations. So, let's hope that if all of these sites, like Fox News, are widely reporting such information, that the initial reporting on Redux was sound. But before we get to that reporting, we should first discuss the source itself. Redux, formed in January 2022, is a site that frames itself as, quote, feminist news and opinion. The site's co-founders are Genevieve Gluck and Anna Slatz. Slatz is also the editor-in-chief, and Gluck is the chief investigative journalist on the site. Both Gluck and even more so Slatz do have journalistic credentials, but also are on top of that known figures in the gender-critical, aka TERF, movement. And I've done several videos on what TERF/gender-critical people are, if you don't know. However, most people are aware, at the very least, that gender-critical folks have a very clear anti-transgender agenda. Whether or not you agree with that anti-transgender agenda is a very different fact, but it is clear that that is the case on either way that you look at it. So already this channel does have a certain bias to it. However, both Gluck and Slatz, as I mentioned earlier, had reporting careers before founding Redux. However, both were also known for inaccurate reporting that fed alt-right media viral misinformation and disingenuous campaigns that I discussed earlier. Gluck, for example, has appeared on numerous gender-critical websites and podcasts, including known anti-transgender misinformation spreader Graham Lineham's YouTube channel, often comparing transgenderism to pornography, porn, and child abuse, often claiming that being transgender is itself a sexualized fetish, something that I've talked about as a problem in many other videos on this channel.
Gender ideology and men who appropriate a female identity reduce women to sexual objects and fantasies of sexual submissiveness. Advocates of gender ideology, especially the MTF, promote the normalization of the sex industry because it validates their definition of woman as sex object and allows them to fund their plastic surgery and hormones.
However, Gluck for me is less concerning than Anna Slatz is. Slatz is much more known for her misinformation campaigns against transgender people in her reporting, and also often writes misinformed reports around LGBTQ and specifically transgender topics, and has been called out for doing so numerous times. She has also written for known alt-right news organizations like the Post-Millennial, Rebel News, and Quinlet, which are themselves known for spreading misinformation about trans people, LGBTQ people, and other marginalized groups. To go into one of them, Rebel News, which Slatz reported for over several years, is a known Canadian far-right website. Neo-Nazi and Proud Boys founder Gavin McInnes was a regular contributor for the site, making content such as a video that was originally titled 10 Things I Hate About Jews. The site has also spread COVID-19 vaccine misinformation, promoted climate denial, as well as creating anti-Muslim content, and faced controversy in Canada numerous times, especially for its positive coverage of the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally in 2017. It has also been denounced by numerous Canadian politicians across the political spectrum.
Organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think,
returning to Slatz though, lest you think that she was unaware of these issues at Rebel News, she was contributing to the site as recently as 2020, well after these controversies that I outlined occurred and were public knowledge. Slatz has also been banned from Twitter several times for anti-transgender content on the platform and has been known to share far-right memes on her Twitter account. Anna Slatz was also a member of the recently taken down harassment forum site Kiwi Farms, and often was known to use the site to solicit article ideas and build misinformation to write her articles about specific figures, such as about Gamergate target Zoe Quinn. Further, while a student editor at a New Brunswick student paper, The Baron, Anna Slatz worked to publish Nazi sympathizers in the paper, such as one Michael Thoreau, who got published in the paper with Anna's help and public defense after he took credit for posting racist posters around the University of New Brunswick and was president of the area's National Socialist Canadian Labour Revival Party, a self-professed neo-Nazi group. So, we can already see right from the jump that Redux is not exactly being built on an unbiased foundation when it comes to talking about transgender issues. Moving even further though, pretty much all of Redux's stories on their site are about transgender people and often discuss trans people solely as sex offenders and sexual deviants, and never post articles about transgender people living lives happily or safely, thereby constantly only exposing their audience to trans people in terms of us being sexually abusive, creating an exposure fallacy to them as Matt Walsh does, making their audience believe that transgender people are all abusive and sexually deviant. Again, this is pretty much all of their reporting, just hyper-focused on transgender people in a negative way. And this type of reporting matches all of TERF rhetoric, which often claims to be feminist, but does nothing really demonstrably for feminism and instead focuses the entirety of its time vilifying trans people. Because apparently the biggest problem facing women today is transgender people, and not, the fact that women's healthcare rights are being taken away by things like the United States Supreme Court. As Seltzer self-showcases, many TERFs are more than willing to work with groups and people that are vilifying women's healthcare in order to attack transgender people. This is sadly a common theme with much of TERF rhetoric, that right-wing groups often use TERF/gender-critical words for their own ends, as gender-critical ideology itself ultimately upholds and supports authoritarianism, something I spoke about in my own video on that subject. However, Saltz seemingly had a self-realization about this, but instead of coming to understand how her attacking and vilifying of trans people ultimately hurts all women, trans or not, she instead formed Redux so she could continue to vilify trans people while having the deniability of not having a direct connection with far-right groups anymore.
I thought it was a shame that it was kind of embarrassing and stupid for women to be directing their clicks, attention, and money to outlets that were grifting off of issues that interested them, but didn't really care about feminism or women's rights or women's humanity on literally anything else, right? All they really cared about was grifting on this very sensational gender ideology war that happens to be impacting us right now. But in mid-2021, I actually got the opportunity to start working with a small feminist outlet, and I approached them and I pitched the idea of pivoting their coverage into the news sphere to try to fill that gap. At the time, this was 4W. I had been doing some freelancing for them in 2021, but in the fall, I actually just outright told them that they should be doing quick news, they should fill this gap. My time there did come to an end in January, but it wasn't for nothing, because me and the amazing Genevieve Gluck, she is at Women Read Women on Twitter. She's an incredible feminist activist. We managed to get together, launch our own outlet, and we were trying to basically serve the same function that we had served while we were at 4W, and that is Redux.
And you can see this in Redux's reporting. Like, quite literally, every article that they posted in August of 2022 was about trans people being sexual predators, and discussing trans people concerning how we're harming women's spaces. Further, if you look into how the site reports transgender people, it will constantly deadname and use incorrect pronouns for transgender people in all of its articles, including the one that it did on Eli Erlick. Hell, Redux articles will even go out of their way to edit direct quotes from people to ensure that a trans person is misgendered within them, which, honestly, is just childish. Like, seriously, this is an aside from this already overlong video, but whenever I see intentional dead naming and incorrect pronoun usages in reporting like this, I'm not, like, deeply offended. I'm not, like, sitting here being like, oh my god, it hurts me so much. I mean, it can hurt many transgender people to be dead named and misgendered just in general. It can hurt their mental health in many cases. But for me personally, when I see this, I just find it kind of childish and silly. Like a kid throwing a temper tantrum. I mean, it's the same reason why Jordan Peterson's recent meltdown about being banned from Twitter was so comical. Because, like, it's just him petulantly whining about silly stuff.
I committed the fatal crime of what has come to be known in the appalling sensorial terminology of the insane activists as dead naming, which is the act of referring to someone who has transitioned, another hated piece of jargon and slogan, by the name and by the inference, the gender, really the sex, that everyone knew them by previously, and in the case of /Elliot, that millions of people recognized and knew.
And Redux is clearly doing it not to be accurate, as being journalistically accurate would be using someone's literal legal name, but doing so just to be mean to a transgender person. Anyways, back on track, beyond the site's childishness, Redux's articles are typically full of inaccurate reporting, such as one article posted on August 18th, 2022 that reported on the false allegations that were being spread online by folks like Libs of TikTok about the children's hospitals that I mentioned earlier. Despite the article being filled with inaccurate reporting and information, none of it has ever been corrected or noted in the article itself, at least as of the time of this filming. So Redux itself is contributing to the harassment of children's hospitals and their workers like Walsh and Libs of TikTok are. So all of this paints a very clear picture of Redux as an incredibly biased news source, especially when it comes to transgender people and issues. So already, the primary source for all the allegations of reporting against Eli Erlick is itself incredibly problematic. But let's actually get to the article itself. When discussing Eli, the Redux article does mention 4 direct accusations made against Eli, except for the fact that 2 of them are actually the same source. The article mentions an alleged victim who posted a Tumblr post accusing abuse by Erlick, and then later on in the article also cites, quote, another young woman, Danny, who also made an accusation against Eli. The article makes it appear that these are 2 separate accusations. Yet, the Tumblr author and Danny are the same person. So right from the jump, the article tried to make it seem like there were more allegations than there actually were by conflating 2 of them. Hey everybody, this is Future Editing Jessie here. I'm just gonna pause this video really briefly just to make a quick little note. When I filmed this video initially, I did use Danny's full name that was reported on already by Redux, Blaire White, and several other news sites. However, as I was editing the video and started to think it over, since Danny's full name has already been reported, at least the name that they had at the time that they made the allegations against Eli, I decided I'm going to just use Danny's first name for this video and not the rest of their name. And I'm going to edit out my using of their full name in the bits that I've already recorded, as well as censoring it in any clips or other reporting that I use from other sources throughout the rest of this video. I know that ultimately it's a small thing to do out of respect for Danny's privacy in the face of everything else that's been revealed about Danny and said about Danny, and it's one that's already been breached by bigger outlets than myself, but I can at least try to give Danny as much privacy as I can on my platform outside of what is necessary for me to report on for this video story. Honestly, I wish I could fully respect their privacy, but honestly, given the stuff that we're talking about and the reporting that's already been done, that's already been breached by other people. But at least for my part, you will hear and see any name beyond Danny be censored in this video going forward. It's out there from other reporters and outlets, but I don't feel like it's necessary for me to be the one to tell it to you for the reporting that I'm doing for this video. So I just wanted to say that, and with that, back to what pre-editing Jessie had to say. Even further, as I mentioned before, Danny is non-binary and even identified as such at the time that they made the accusation on Tumblr. So the article is misgendering the supposed victim by saying that they're a young woman throughout the article. In fact, Danny themselves posted on their Tumblr blog pushing back against gender-critical feminists utilizing their story for their own ends as Redux is, stating, quote, 1. Stop misgendering my abuser, claiming to be in support of me and her other survivors. You're not. 2. Stop misgendering me to twist my rape trauma into your vile trans misogynist narratives. I am trans. I am non-binary. I'm a femme. My pronouns are they, them. I'm not a woman/female. 3. Stop making gross assumptions and generalizations about what kind of genitals trans people have. 4. Stop making invasive, violating assumptions about how my abuser raped me. 5. Generally get your cis heterosexist hands off my trauma. Do not touch me like that. 6. I hope Twitter actually follows through with its misgendering policy and permanently bans all of your accounts. Which immediately showcases how the article is less about caring about representing the supposed victim and their allegations, and more about using these allegations to attack Eli, who it also misgenders throughout the article. Further, the Redux article says that Danny died by suicide in 2019. Their cited source for this supposed death is a screenshot of a tweet stating that Danny died by suicide and was abused by Eli. Further, the tweet says that Danny, which by the way is spelt differently in the tweet than the name of the person that was actually accusing Eli, also states that this Danny was black, which Danny was not. Danny is of Korean descent. So their apparent source for Danny's suicide is not really credible or accurate on any accounts. Further, Redux implies in the article that Danny's supposed suicide might have been due to mental health issues stemming from the alleged abuse by Eli, which is just wild speculation. Yet the article ends on this wild speculation, meaning that the last impression that this article gives is that Eli might have abused someone so badly that they died. And Redux speculates this without any acknowledgement that it might not be true other than putting the word reportedly in the sentence, giving them just enough wiggle room if this information turns out to be false. Just enough plausible deniability in the reporting, but still making sure to leave the impression that Eli bullied and abused a trans person into suicide. And by the way, while the Redux article does use the word reportedly in its discussion of the suicide, this suicide was reported as a fact by Blaire White in her video on Eli to her audience of over 1 million subscribers.
Danny made multiple accusations against Eli, including sexual abuse. She has since taken her own life. She has since committed suicide and claimed that Eli abused her and then attempted to silence her through a smear campaign.
Oh, also not to mention that Blaire does also misgender Danny in this clip, and we know that she's not just doing it based on reporting from the Redux article, but because Blaire actually reveals later on that she looked at Danny's original post, we can know that Blaire had every chance to see that Danny was indeed non-binary and still chose to misgender them anyways. However, when Fox News followed up on these allegations made by Redux with Eli herself, Eli stated to Fox News, quote, "Danny is still alive, and the claim that they committed suicide is simply false." So, this seems to be a big point and basic fact to get right. Is Danny even alive anymore or not? So, to get to the bottom of that question, I did more investigating. From what I could find, Danny doesn't have much of an online presence at all anymore. For example, Danny's Tumblr account hasn't been active since the year that they made the accusations against Eli and posted that post that I said before, pushing back against TERFs utilizing their accusations. Hey, editing Jessie here, just cutting in again. So I actually shot and edited this section of the video, and in its initial form, I actually went through all the publicly available information that I had found that pointed to Danny being alive at this point. However, while all of this was publicly available information that I was going through, as I was editing the video, I started to feel uncomfortable because I felt that going through all the information piece by piece in a video like this was kind of invasive and potentially dangerous to a potential victim, especially considering the less than magnanimous intentions that some have used this potential victim's story for their own reporting, as I've already outlined earlier in this video. So instead of doing what I originally planned, what I'm going to do instead is this. I am going to reveal the 2 most conclusive pieces of evidence that I found that point to Danny being alive, and will also just state that I did find a few other pieces of evidence that are inconclusive, but do also point to this person being alive that I'm not going to share in this video. So, with that said, the first piece of information that I will show is a photo of Danny posted on a Facebook account that I have anonymized, so you can't figure out whose account this actually is, but can confirm that this anonymized account is a real person. This photo was posted online on a date after Danny's supposed suicide, and the photo was taken at an event that took place after Danny's supposed suicide. The second piece of information that I'm going to show, though I have heavily censored it, is their voter registration information that I was able to find. In this voter registration, which is again publicly available, I have censored for you on screen all the identifiable information, except the information that has already been widely reported on. The only piece of relevant information that we need to see is that this voter registration showcases their voter status as active, meaning that as far as the state government in which they may possibly reside is concerned, Danny is still alive. That being said, like I said, I do have more information than just these 2 pieces, but again, those pieces of information are not conclusive, but they do create a preponderance of evidence that, for me, points to them still being alive. The 2 that I've shown you are both public and the most conclusive pieces of evidence that I have found, and I have attempted to hide as much information in these that I can to be able to protect Danny while still giving you what I can to show that they are still alive, at least as far as I can tell. So while the evidence I show doesn't 100% confirm that they are still alive, Short of me literally speaking to Danny in the flesh, I am as reasonably certain that they are alive as I could possibly be. If I'm being entirely honest, even revealing this much is uncomfortable to me in terms of respecting Danny's privacy. And I know that even showing what I did is probably pushing that boundary a little bit. But it is the best ethical balance that I could find to both respect Danny as best I could, while also showing you how disingenuous and inept the reporting was on the part of those simply saying Danny, reportedly or not, died by suicide without doing any follow-up on that. If those reporters had wanted to, they could have also found this information that I showed you and thereby put in their initial reportings what I am doing right now, saying that there is no conclusive evidence that Danny has actually died by suicide. But they left it simply at Danny died by suicide, thereby leading to the implication that, again, Eli led Danny to commit suicide. As a result, we can see that these reporters were either dangerously inept in their reporting or intentionally misleading in their reporting, or both. That being said, back to what I already recorded. I hope that I've at least proven to you that there is at least reasonable ability to conclude that Danny is still very much alive, which is way more than Redux reported. So, the problem remains that Redux decided to release an article and give credence to the idea that this person supposedly died by suicide based on one incredibly inaccurate tweet with nary a mention that there is slightly more, if still inconclusive, evidence that this person is still alive. So at best, it showcases incompetent and negligent reporting, and at worst, it's deliberately misleading. Given the site's overall anti-transgender bias, my feeling would be that it was a deliberate choice by the reporter, though that is me speculating. The only evidence in all of this that I could find of anyone having died by suicide that is even tangentially related to the situation is a Danny Somerville, who died in 2018, and whose name does match the spelling in the tweet cited by Redux, and who also does appear to be black, and who also did volunteer at TSER while Eli worked there. However, it is important to note that this is not the same person who made accusations against Eli in 2016, the person that Redux was referring to when they stated that that person died by suicide. This is a completely different person. I did personally reach out to Eli for comment on this for this video, and she messaged me back saying, quote, "My understanding is that a volunteer at TSER named Danny, not Danny, committed suicide in 2018. This isn't someone I knew well or spoke to more than a handful of times. I saw a post confusing him with Danny, possibly because he volunteered at TSER." So, let's just pause here for a moment to take in everything that I've just said and pointed out about the Redux article. How it was full of inaccuracies and definitely full of intentionally misleading reporting, as well as potentially misleading reporting that at its very best showcases dangerous incompetence in research and disregard for the consequences of reporting on as such on a site run by people with a clear anti-trans bias, as well as ties to right-wing hate groups. This is the source of the information spread about Eli by Matt Walsh, Fox News, Blaire White, and more. Not to mention that the article is clearly attempting to exploit a trans person's supposed death in order to attack a trans woman, rather than caring about that person's death in itself. Keep all that in mind. But again, as I said before, now that we have cut through all the bullshit, let's actually talk about the important thing, which is the actual claims of abuse that have validity to them. Because regardless of who they're accusing or the way the accusations have been wielded to attack people, it is important to make sure we listen to potential victims because they deserve to be heard. And honestly, I'm quite frustrated that it took all of this just to be able to hear what this person had to say in the first place. But regardless of who reported them initially and their motivations, we strive on this channel to believe folks here when they make credible accusations and listen to them. So now that we know that these accusations are credible, let's move forward by taking them at their own face value, not by trying to associate them with Redux's terrible reporting. So that being said, there are 3 allegations to go through in the Redux article. The first comes only from a screenshot of a tweet that the Redux article cites. The tweet accuses Eli of throwing this person out of a nightclub for calling out Eli harassing them, which is hard to confirm happening either way. In a statement to Fox News, Eli stated that she didn't know who this individual was. I did reach out to Eli for further clarification, and she did get back to me to say that she did host an event at that venue that the person was referring to. However, she reaffirmed that she didn't know this woman and stated that she didn't remove anyone from the venue and confirmed with the venue owner that no one was thrown from the event. Eli also shared with me a photo of a text exchange that she had with the venue owner that showed as much, though I can't confirm the validity of these texts in this screenshot. So ultimately, at the end of the day, this accusation does come down to a she said situation. However, I could no longer find the accusing tweet online. I could only see it from its posting in the Redux article. And the account from which it was made has since been suspended from Twitter, though I couldn't find the reason for the suspension. The Redux article claims that the account was suspended after trans activists reported the account for misgendering Erlick in the post, which it did do and does violate Twitter's rules, as we saw with another certain person on Twitter recently. However, the Redux article, without outright stating it, kind of downplays this with its wording, saying that it was argued that the person had misgendered Erlick, when it's not really argued, it's pretty blatantly clear. Though, considering Redux itself misgenders Eli throughout its article, you can see why they think it's arguable. But even on that, I could not confirm any of this information. The link that Redux places in its article that supposedly supports this accusation leads to nowhere. So I'm glad they have all their sources in a row. However, using the Internet Archive Wayback Machine on the account reveals that the account mainly focused solely on sharing and stating TERF and anti-transgender rhetoric, such as tweets comparing being transgender with conversion therapy, which is a horrific comparison to make. Further, this tweet alleges that Eli, quote, admitted to forcing queer women with vaginas to have penis and vagina sex. However, Eli never admitted to this, and also, a penis is an organ that Eli no longer has, nor did have at the time of this tweet. This tweet is making accusations of something that Eli literally, physically could not do. Not a particularly trustworthy source of information or allegations. Further, if we want to talk about backlash on Twitter, this tweet was actually made in response to an article Eli wrote for the LGBTQ online magazine Into about Ariana Grande. After the publishing of this article, Eli did receive criticism for the article, and which then Into editor-in-chief Zach Stafford did say didn't meet their editorial standards, which is on Into, and which Stafford takes full credit for. However, because of this article, Eli received death threats, leading Into to remove Eli's name from the article for her protection. Eventually, the article was removed, and Stafford did learn about, quote, allegations made in the past about Eli, presumably the allegations like the one made in this tweet. However, we can move on to allegations that do have much more validity to them. The second allegation comes from a post made on Facebook that has since been deleted from Facebook and is only currently archived on a gender-critical Tumblr blog post, which is where Redux cites it from. As this post has not been widely reported as Danny, I have changed the accuser's name in order to protect them in this video, so we're going to call them Annika. Annika alleges that they had sex with Eli in high school, and that while they were having this consensual agreed-upon sex, Eli allegedly performed a sex act without their consent. Now, to be very clear, even if someone has consensual sex with someone, if they do something that had not been made clear or consented to before that, it can be sexual harm, which is the phrase that Annika herself uses, which Annika distinguishes as separate from sexual assault, at least in how they are colloquially using this language in their accusation. Further, Eli did not deny knowing Annika and did not deny having had sex with Annika. So, this allegation does have a lot more credibility to it than the rest. Now, I do have more to discuss about this allegation, but I am going to save it for reasons which will be clear later on. However, one thing to note is that this post and allegation was made at the same time and in solidarity with the accusation that we're going to discuss next. The final accusation, and the second credible one, comes from Danny, as I mentioned earlier. Essentially, the accusation alleges that Eli pursued Danny while they were both at college and argued that Eli, as the head of TSER, held power over Danny. Danny alleges that Eli pursued Danny with aggressive flirting at the time and pressured Danny into becoming Eli's partner and, after that, navigated sex at times in a, quote, fucked up way. As a result, Danny directly accused Eli of rape, emotional abuse, and gaslighting in order to downplay and lie about the harm after Danny made the allegations public. Danny then shares several month-long DM conversations that Danny had with Eli, though again, I cannot confirm if these DMs are real or not. However, these DMs do detail a time from 2015 to 2016 where the two spoke back and forth, a time after their alleged relationship, but before Danny made the allegations public. For most of these DMs, Danny shares accusations at Eli with her, to which Eli sometimes replies with brief statements, and sometimes longer statements. The two also, during this exchange, share Microsoft Word and PDF document files, for which Danny claims the first of which was a letter that they shared being vulnerable with Eli about the abuse that they felt that they experienced during the relationship, to which Eli in the DM states she cried at reading and says, quote, "I hurt you." However, I and no one could confirm what the contents of these letters are that they're discussing. We can only see that the files were shared. Blaire White, in her video about the accusations around Eli, shared this section of the DMs, and shared Eli saying, quote, "I hurt you," out of context, to make it seem like Eli had admitted directly to abuse and rape, which, if you see the full context of the DMs, is not the case.
Also, a very important part that I did not say in this video is that after Danny came forward and posted these allegations, Eli actually DM'd Danny. Danny made those DMs public, one of which said, "Danny, you are so important to me and so many people, and you always will be. I hurt you, and I have to do what I can to not hurt anyone else." This is literally an admission of raping Danny, because again, this came directly after the posts were made. And this is Eli's response.
This reporting by Blaire is actually not true, and either a mistake or deliberate misframing of this DM by removing it from critical context by Blaire. Further, this is just Eli stating that she had hurt Danny, but not for what reason or accepting guilt for specific allegations as Blaire made it seem. Now, I'm not trying to downplay the accusations, I'm more just again having to point out how certain people like Blaire White have overemphasized and removed critical context on specific aspects of this accusation in order to construe Eli as quickly having admitted to rape, which she didn't, at least not that we can tell from these DMs. All that Eli admits to in this moment is that she hurt Danny. We don't know in what way or in what context they're discussing that hurt. In 2016, after all the DMs that we could see in the Tumblr post were made, Danny then made the accusations public and made them viewable to the TSCR organization that Eli worked for that we mentioned earlier. Then, once the allegations were made public, Danny alleges that Eli banned them from the TSCR Facebook group. At this point, Eli's fellow co-founder at TSCR, Alex Sereno, then posted on the TSCR Facebook page the accusations, saying that it was important for everyone to see as it would affect the organization's running. Alex also stated in the post that Eli was without enough oversight at the organization. Eli then DM'd Alex to state that the allegations were false, trans-misogynist, and inappropriate, and then also accused Alex of using the allegations for campaigning against Eli within the organization. However, from posts seen on Danny's Tumblr accusations, Eli potentially, according to Danny's allegations, blocked Danny unilaterally from the group's Facebook page without anyone else at the organization giving the okay, explaining why Alex would possibly be upset at Eli and say that she didn't have enough oversight. As a result of all of this, we can see that there was no direct admitting to have committed abuse by Eli, either before or after allegations were made public, either privately or publicly, at least in what has been shown by Danny and what we can see elsewhere. Finally, Danny also stated in their Tumblr post that they were going to pursue a Title IX investigation. For those of you who don't know, Title IX in the United States requires universities to start immediate investigations independent of law enforcement upon receiving notice of potential sexual assault or harassment. To note though, while I will talk about the Title IX investigations, I could not find any evidence of any actual law enforcement investigations into these allegations. So, all of that is quite a lot. And honestly, a lot of it concerned me, as I'm sure it did many of you, as well it should. However, there is a lot of crucial context missing, and none of this information and allegations are conclusive against Eli. They are just credible allegations against her. And I want to emphasize, these are credible. I am not dismissing them or trying to shove them off to the side. They are 100% credible in their allegations against Eli. But I am stopping here to note that this, everything that I have said so far, is the totality of information that Redux used in its reporting about these allegations. Redux did, at least from what I can tell from the reporting, zero follow-up or further investigation beyond simply stating that these accusations had been made, alongside the other misinformation that I discussed earlier. On top of this, the two credible accusations, combined with the completely uncredible one that Redux reports on and gives equal weight to in their article, paints Eli as an active and ongoing sexual abuser. Yet, this reporting is wildly incomplete because there is so much more that you should look into before you begin reporting on something like this. So, I decided to investigate these allegations further myself. But keep in mind before we get any further, everything after this point is more than the Redux article shared or investigated, and was the sole basis for Matt Walsh's mentions of the allegations against Eli in his video, as well as Blaire White's entire video on Eli that she released to her over 1 million subscribers. Also, remember that I am a single person, a single YouTuber, not a whole organization like Redux or the Daily Wire, nor do I have 1 million followers like Blaire White. Yet, I was able to find out everything after this point on my own. Just doing a simple Google search, we find we have a bit of Eli's point of view readily available on the matter, something missing from Redux's article. Fox News, which did better reporting than Redux, which is a sad statement that I ever have to say Fox News did better reporting than anybody, followed up on these allegations after Redux's report by reaching out to Eli herself. Eli stated in an email to Fox that Danny was her academic mentor and that Danny was actually older than Eli at the time, which, if true, calls into question the power imbalance that Danny described as in Eli's favor. So, investigating on my own, while I can't confirm if was indeed Eli's mentor or not, I can independently verify, based on graduation information, that is in fact older than Eli, lending credence to Eli's claims. Eli claims that she was 18 to 19 and that was 20 to 22 over the period of the alleged events, which matches my findings. To note, this age difference isn't huge and could be seen as negligible, though I will also state that at that age, when you're someone entering into college as a freshman, someone who is a junior or senior over you does feel like they do have some sort of power in terms of the balance, and if that was indeed a mentor towards Eli, that is definitively a power imbalance. But again, it could be seen as a negligible thing. Eli also claims that Danny assaulted her and that Eli started her own Title IX investigation in order to keep Danny off campus after they graduated, to which Eli then claims the accusations by Danny were made in retaliation for. So, from here, as I've mentioned a few times throughout this video, I have reached out to Eli specifically to further elaborate on a lot of these claims, to which I got several responses from her. First, I asked her about the other accusations that supposedly around that time. Personally, I could not find these other supposed allegations that had been made, but again, his Tumblr account no longer exists, so maybe they were there. However, Eli did state that she was in direct contact with one of the other people who had been accused of abuse. In an email that was shared with me, this person did state that they had dated Danny and claimed to have been shocked by the allegations that Danny made against them. I personally reached out to this person and did get independent confirmation that their contact with Eli were in fact genuine. Now, obviously, I can't dismiss these allegations against this person, but it does lend credence to Eli's words that other accusations by were made at the same time. And by the way, I have not identified this person at their request. Now, to point out, just because someone accuses multiple people of abuse does not mean that they weren't abused by multiple people. All that this proves is that more than one allegation was made by and that both people that I could get in contact with about them deny them, as well as showcasing that Eli has not stated any incorrect information to Fox News or elsewhere, at least so far, that we can tell. Eli also confirmed to me that she had called for a Title IX investigation of herself with her college after Danny's allegations, which she provided proof of by showing me a letter that stated as such that was signed by Pfizer College's Title IX coordinator, Corrine Vorenkamp, who did hold that position at the time that this investigation would have been started, information that is publicly available on the college's website. Eli also offered another letter that was signed by Vorenkamp that shows that the investigation found that there was, quote, no merit in the case proceeding to a hearing. This does not necessarily mean that nothing happened, but that the college investigation found nothing that could be acted upon legally. I have reached out to Vorenkamp and the department itself independently for confirmation of the validity of these documents. It should be noted, however, that there have been concerns raised since Eli's graduation that Vorenkamp, at the time that she was in the office, did not run Title IX investigations well, with calls by some students to reevaluate her position at the college. However, there have also been some students who have spoken out in support of Vorenkamp's work. To her credit, though, Eli did tell me when sharing these documents that, quote, I never find Title IX to be the most reliable source, and it has failed me many times before. However, I think it's useful to have that designation to let folks know that this has been thoroughly investigated. Beyond these documents, though, however, Eli was open in discussing her relationship with Danny and the mistakes that she felt she made that she is willing to discuss. Quote, it's impossible to prove or disprove abuse dynamics. That's what makes it so easy for the far right to lie about me. However, Danny was 2 years older than me, my academic mentor, and was introducing me to the college community when I had just graduated high school, and they were entering their junior year of college, which is a pretty glaring power imbalance. They had quite a severe victim complex in which they needed to be, theoretically, less powerful than anyone around them so they could evade accountability for any of their actions. I think it's important to get to the heart of the allegations. Danny claimed I raped them via coercion because they were uncomfortable with me flirting with them. They admitted to providing verbal consent. However, I have many screenshots of them escalating and making explicit comments about me immediately after we met, sometimes beyond what I was even comfortable with. If they were uncomfortable, which I have my doubts about, there was simply no way for me to know this when they were providing an affirmative yes. Those are Eli's words, and I did ask for the screenshots that she mentions. These screenshots do show Danny aggressively flirting with Eli all the way back in 2013. While these do not disprove that Eli might have pursued Danny as Danny claims, it does show that, if these are real, Danny was also aggressive in flirting. Another screenshot that Eli shared with me comes from 2015. One of a DM in where Danny tells Eli not to express or even pretend to feel irritated or, quote, whatever it is you feel when you don't get your way. To which Eli states, okay. To which Danny responds then, quote, reassure me that I'm making the right calls when I don't do your bitch work and whatever shit you always want me to do exactly when you want it. Don't do this, okay, making me feel bad about myself. Now, to be clear, I cannot prove the validity of these screenshots. However, it should be noted that these screenshots shown were shared by Danny themselves and not Eli, who only had them saved. However, if these are real, they do paint a picture of a relationship between Danny and Eli in a much grayer light than simply the black and white Danny as abused and Eli as abuser, and even showcase Danny themselves as possibly being emotionally manipulative and abusive. Moving on, I also asked Eli about the phrase I hurt you that she sent Danny in her DMs in the post seen on Tumblr. To this question, Eli herself did accept some fault in the relationship, but does allege that these confirmations were not what Blaire White and Redux reported them as her accepting responsibility for rape and abuse. Quote, embarrassingly, I did tell Danny they had no reason to be depressed, which is obviously not okay. I was 18 and it was 2013. I sincerely didn't know depression doesn't need external factors to occur. I apologized profusely, and then they used that apology and attempt at being accountable to say I admitted guilt for everything they accused me of. Again, this is unverifiable. However, this version of events does work with what we can see in the DMs. However, Danny's version could also be potentially true. Further, Eli stated, quote, Danny deleted the allegations from their social media accounts along with recanting most of the accusations during the Title IX proceedings. If you've read their allegations, you'll see they accuse me of purposefully misgendering and preventing them from transitioning, which is very ironic considering I helped contact their top surgeon and wrote them letters of recommendation for surgery, along with helping them change their pronouns on school docs. I think it goes to showcase the level of paranoia they experienced against anyone in their life before they started new mental health medications. Again, none of the information in Eli's statements are confirmable. So those are Eli's accounting of the events that happened with Danny. Further, I asked her about the accusations made by Annika against her, to which Eli stated, quote, more importantly, Danny's friend, Annika, the one who also accused me, and I had a conversation recently in which they admitted I had asked for consent, and that they were pressured by Danny to write a similar post about me. So, Danny recanted many of the accusations, Annika recanted all of theirs, and admitted Danny was behind them. Further, Eli told Fox News and me that she had a recording of Annika where the two discussed Annika's allegations, which I did ask for. Eli provided this phone call, though she asked me not to share it publicly as it was a very, very personal conversation. And I will say that I did listen to this phone call, and out of respect for Eli and Annika, I will not discuss the specifics of the conversation. What I will say is this. I can confirm that one of the participants in the call is indeed Eli. The other, I cannot 100% verify their identity based solely on an audio recording, though they do say that they are Annika within the call itself. What I can also confirm is that if the call is faked and not real, it is a hell of a fake, because it was deeply uncomfortable for me to listen to. And considering what it was about, I understand why Eli did not wish it to be shared, because it gets very specific and it gets very personal from both of them. Again, I will not state specifics, but in the conversation, Annika does admit to Danny having told Annika that Eli was actively abusing people. Hence why Annika believed that coming forward with accusations about Eli at that time was the noble thing to do. Annika also states that at the time of the alleged abuse, they thought that the event was actually accidental on Eli's part, and only after seeing Danny's accusation that they came to think that Eli may have been intentional in those actions. To remind you, Annika alleged that during consensual sex, Eli performed an unconsented to sex act. However, on that note, Annika did admit that Eli did ask for consent visually during sex. Yet, at the time, Annika states that she was unclear on what was being asked for visually, meaning that the issue doesn't come down necessarily to Eli performing a sex act without permission, but an issue of miscommunication on Eli's part during sex. And to be very clear, this is a failure on Eli's part to make a clear and concise verbal ask to Annika. And I'm not downplaying that at all. Consent is all about being clear and concise and getting enthusiastic consent from someone before you do something. And I will say, to Eli's credit, this failure is something Eli admitted to both in the call that I heard and said it to Annika, as well as in discussion with me after the fact about the call when I came back at her with questions about this. Eli admitted both to Annika and to me that she had done harm to Annika, and she took responsibility for that failure to Annika and apologized to Annika in the call without any caveat or attempt to downplay the harm. This apology, by the way, is not for any of us watching this video to accept on Annika's part. It's only for Annika to be able to accept. And for her part, Annika did not accept the apology within the call that I heard, and still, by the end of the call, had taken issue with how Eli handled the moment during their sex. And also, on top of all of this, Eli stated to Annika in the call, as well as to me, that since this miscommunication, Eli has stated that she has always tried to make sure to never be unclear about issues like this before and during sex. So all that being said, this call, if real, which, by the way, I cannot confirm if the call is real or not, but it does seem very valid to me, but again, that's my speculation, it does confirm that Eli did not showcase the active disregard for consent that Annika made it seem to be in the initial accusation. Unfortunately, on all of this, you're going to have to trust my word that this is what the audio states. And if you don't trust me on that, I 100% understand. I'm not trying to force you to. Still, I am not going to play the audio because, honestly, telling you as much as I did, just vaguely describing stuff, hell, having to listen to this audio on my own in the first place, even with the intentions that I have to get to the truth of this matter through all of the bullshit, frankly makes me deeply uncomfortable and was something difficult for me personally to have to listen to because it touches upon my own personal stuff. So, with all of those pieces of information that I just provided you, what does this all come down to? Well, certainly, we can, and probably never will be, 100% sure about what happened. At least not unless there is a public legal finding made, or Eli, Annika, or Danny come forward and state differently than they already have. Which, given that it appears that everyone involved has moved on, I doubt will happen. On top of that, while I did reach out to Danny and Annika to try to get their statements on the matter, they were not readily available for contact and did not respond to me. And I also don't know for sure if I have their correct contact information. Which does mean that a lot of my information that I provided in this investigation does come directly from Eli herself. Which does mean that many of my sources are biased towards Eli. However, as I said, I could independently validate a decent chunk of the information, such as the Title IX investigation done by Pfizer College, as well as the fact that they concluded that there was no legal basis to continue anything further. On top of that, Eli did provide confirmable information around the dynamics of Eli and Danny's relationship that Danny themselves did not provide in their original Tumblr post. And on top of that, keep in mind that a number of the sources that we were initially discussing that came from Redux were themselves biased against Eli. So I feel like there is somewhat of a balance in terms of the amount of evidence that we are getting from different sources and different biases. On top of that, I have tried my best to be open about what I couldn't find and what I couldn't confirm, as well as what the lack of verification means for how we can interpret this information. On top of that, too, I also wish you to know, again, that my intention here wasn't coming into this to defend Eli, but to try to get to the truth of the matter and try to give as much credence to the alleged victims as I possibly could. On top of this, for her part, Eli does admit to being imperfect in these relationships and takes responsibility for causing harm in some instances, such as not being clear in asking for consent with Annika, as well as downplaying depression during their relationship, which does add validity to the situation's complexity. Because generally, in cases like these, no one is a perfect human being, regardless of who was the primary or sole abuser or held the most power in the dynamic. It is typically on the person with power to be held accountable, but, as I said, even that we can't confirm either way. Oh, and also we do have a dismissible and unreliable tweet accusation. So that is, ultimately, all we can definitively say about the situation and these allegations on its own terms. Yet, that being said, none of us are the law. We, personally, hearing all of this, don't have to determine one way or the other. And it's okay to not be comfortable with Eli Erlick in light of these accusations. I myself am not entirely comfortable with the ambiguity of this entire situation. And that's okay. I'm not here to make a legal defense for Erlick, nor am I directly on her side. And I'm not here to dissuade any of you from a sense of discomfort that you may feel at this situation. I wish I could, but I can't. Even she herself admits to mistakes that caused harm. As someone who has had personal experience with a similar situation on the receiving end of such kind of harm, it's not something that makes me feel good about her. Though it should be noted, Eli herself is saying that she also suffered abuse as well, which we do have some evidence that leans towards showcasing that, such as the way that Danny spoke to Eli in those DMs, as well as the fact that we can confirm that Eli did start the Title IX investigation. We can't confirm either way, which is the truth. As Eli herself stated, it's nearly impossible to prove abuse dynamics. So, if after all of this, you're not okay, and you are uncomfortable, even outright don't like Eli's responses or actions, that's okay. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we can't fully know what to believe in these situations because we don't have all the information, and it's somewhat impossible to have all the information. I wish it was black and white clear, but it's not. And again, we're not the law, so we don't have to make clear-cut decisions based on incomplete information like a judge or jury would. We can just be people who are allowed to sit in the uncomfortability of it all. It's something I wish we as a society did more of, to be frank. My intent with this video was not to defend Eli, and my goal here was not to dissuade you differently. So, that does lead to the question, though, of what was my goal? We've gone down this whole rabbit hole of investigation, and I spent a ton of time and energy going into all of this, and a lot of emotional energy as well. But we need to pull out and ask the question, what the fuck was the point of any of this? Why do we talk about any of this? Why do we have to spend so much goddamn time on this topic? Because all of this sure as hell didn't start where it should have started initially, with a desire to listen to the alleged victims. The impetus, at least on my end, for all of this was because I wish to include a brief segment in my upcoming Matt Walsh video breaking down the misinformation he used against trans people in his What is a Woman documentary that touched upon a matter that only incidentally was related to the film. Eli Erlick's uncovering Matt Walsh's surreptitious methods of getting people to appear in the movie without full consent or a knowledge of what it was. This, then, potentially, led Walsh to further attack Eli Erlick, calling her a drug trafficker without any discussion of the nuance of the issues surrounding why this had happened and the morality of such potential acts related to getting trans people healthcare. All at the same time while not divulging his conflict of interest in discrediting Eli due to her coming forward about his documentary, which would showcase his potential motivation for wishing to delegitimize and vilify her. From there, right-wing news organizations like Redux, in which as an organization has clear vested bias in tearing down transgender activists' reputations, posted an incredibly misleading, ineptly reported, irresponsible, and dangerous hit piece about Eli. A piece that, to sum up, gave equal weight to semi-credible allegations and random tweets, conflated one allegation as multiple, and left off the article on the impression that Eli has led someone to suicide despite there being evidence pointing to that person still being alive. And the article even refused to do even the most basic of follow-up on any of the allegations beyond sharing screenshots of since publicly deleted posts, some of which themselves have clearly disprovable information. From there, this terrible piece by Redux was taken by other outlets and people and then regurgitated as straight fact in some cases, to potentially millions of viewers and followers. I mean, Blaire White, a trans woman again with over 1 million subscribers, stated all of this stuff about Eli as straightforward fact. This then leads her audience to just instantly believe whatever she said about Eli as truth, which it's not, even in the Redux article, which gives a very, 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 very thinly veiled reportedly. And this isn't even the first time, by the way, that Blaire White has done this. I am not going into Blaire White entirely because, dear God, she could warrant her own whole video, but I will note that White does love to traffic in these trans predator videos that vilify trans people. Literally, part of her brand on this platform on YouTube relies on her finding and lazily regurgitating stories of trans people being predators. She has a vested financial interest in repeating these stories to her audience. She has also been known to, in these videos, get much of her information wrong and often relies on the bias of transphobic cisgender people to spread misinformation about transgender people. I would recommend this excellent video by YouTuber D'Angelo Wallace that breaks down a lot of the issues around Blaire White and discusses explicitly how she spreads misinformation around trans people, specifically where he goes into a similar situation around Blaire White surrounding her video on bodybuilder and transgender person Janae Kroc, who experienced harassment after Blaire White posted a very misinformed video about her. It was so misinformed that Blaire White herself released an apology, though D'Angelo Wallace also points out that this apology was not taking full responsibility and was deliberately given less of a platform than the original Kroc video was, meaning that more people saw the misinformation around Kroc rather than the actual correction of that misinformation.
Human, and I definitely am going to get things wrong, but what I can promise is to work my absolute hardest to not let this type of thing happen again, to minimize the cracks for which an inaccuracy can slip through, and to just be more steadfast in reactions to things as well.
So it's like, is this an acceptable apology? Kind of. I call it the Jeffree Star approach. Like, basically just apologize for the things that weren't really that bad. Then you said sorry, and you never had to actually address what you did wrong. Like, getting something wrong in a video isn't a bad action. That just means you messed up. So with that being said, why didn't she address any of her actual actions?
I'm seeing a sentiment of people who definitely want me to talk about this again, but this time in video form, and I actually want to as well, so I'm here to do that.
Nobody was asking her to talk about this in video form. We can read. We wanted her to talk about it on the same platform that she spread the misinformation on, which was much larger than her Twitter.
While I know some people think this was intentional deception on my part, I can guarantee you this is not the case. Lying about something that the public can then go correct you on is only slightly more dumb than not doing enough research and coming to a false conclusion.
The issue with this assertion is that she's done exactly what she's saying. As dumb as she maintains that it is, I've shown examples in my video of her lying about things that could easily be fact-checked.
So clearly, Blaire White has a history of doing these things, and she's done it even beyond Kroc, having had to apologize numerous times for spreading misinformation around trans people.
Point blank, my perception that Riley was lying about being trans or pretending to be trans was just incorrect, and for me to not come on here and correct that after the amount of response videos I've made where I assert just that, one of them being just less than 2 weeks ago, would be wrong. Riley's video really got me thinking, and I feel bad. Not for criticizing Riley on Islam, not for criticizing Riley on Trump, not Riley's politics, any of that. I don't regret any of that. But the incessant push to prove that Riley was not trans, I'm just realizing was probably really hurtful. And I'm aware that there's no way I would have known before the video where Riley actually discloses this information, but I feel like I was still in the wrong for trying to assume what was in someone's heart and mind when there was just simply no way I could have known.
Frankly, speaking for myself, how long will she be given such a vast platform that she uses with incredible callousness and dangerous ineptitude to gain attention from right-wing people by building off of their transphobic prejudices against trans people as child groomers and predators? It's unacceptable and frankly disgusting. But Blaire White isn't going to change because she's not incentivized to do so at this point. I mean, why would she? Her whole platform is literally built on these sort of trans predator pieces and work, playing into anti-trans biases and prejudices and placing herself as one of the good ones. Because they're playing into her predominantly right-wing audience's predetermined biases around trans people, and they're able to dissuade their possible concerns around maybe they got some information around trans people wrong because a trans person is the one telling them it. Well, my transgender friend said it's okay, so it must be fine.
Than what we hear from just about all the other trans activists who are out there. But I wonder how many in the trans community actually agree with you, but they're too scared to say anything. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
I'm going to tell you something that maybe some people aren't aware of, but it is a loud minority of activists who make us all look insane. I'm going to say that. The amount of people, it really is. The amount of people who reach out to me and say, oh my God,
This is how I've always felt, and I've never been able to say it. I mean, I could open right now my DMs and probably find 50 from the last hour. It's pretty crazy. So, it's unfortunate, but the crazier you are, the more you tend to get media coverage. So, I feel like if I had purple hair and piercings and facial hair, I would probably end up on every news publication, not just this amazing one. You know what I mean? And unfortunately, a lot of these activists are walking, talking clickbait, right? But most trans people that I have met and that I see online definitely agree with most of what I say. Not all, but most.
Blaire White, thanks so much for coming on Outsiders. Hope we'll get you on again. Your videos are very funny as well. You've got a great sense of humour. Just tell us briefly where people can find you on YouTube and Twitter.
Yeah, just search me up. Just search Blaire White. I'm lucky I'm the only Blaire White. And there's an E on the end of Blaire, and you'll find me.
No matter how many times that Blaire White apologizes or recants or needs to state that she made a mistake, it will never really ever stop a large portion of her audience from believing her because she is selling to them what they already want to hear anyways. But even beyond that, and I promise you there's a reason I'm going after Blaire White specifically here, but we're just going to focus on it for a second, her status as a trans woman extends beyond her right-wing audience because it gives her a sense of validity within the transgender community itself. While many transgender people are well aware of White's deliberate throwing of the trans community under the bus for money and attention by right-wing groups, she is still given some credence by some trans people within the community, which I perfectly understand. You want to try to believe and include everyone in the trans community considering we are a marginalized group. I totally understand this. Even though I have many problems with Blaire White, I understand why some people would still want to listen to her. As well as the fact that White was an early transgender influencer on this platform, which means many people still look up to her for a lot of the work that she did in her early years to give representation to transgender people, as problematic as it was. However, this does lead to many transgender people believing a lot of the misinformation that Blaire White has spread. For example, though, after I cited Eli Erlick's words in a recent video about transmedicalism, a video where Eli's words were incidental to the issue I was discussing, some accused me of not doing my research on Eli and being incompetent, saying I should listen to Blaire White, and often even stating that Eli herself was 100% a transgender sexual abuser. Now, to be fair, I will accept responsibility that I was unaware of the sexual allegations made against Eli at the time. I just used Eli's words because I was aware of her from my other work on Matt Walsh. So that is on me. I totally get that. I hope I have proved that I think I did a little bit more research than Blaire since then. Just a hair more. Yet, you can see how Blaire's still moderate cachet in the trans community sets trans people against trans people, and ultimately helps those in the right wing attack transgender rights and further stigmas. I mean, to be frank, this kind of post accusing me of not doing my research angers me. Not anger at the person accusing me of failing to do my research, but anger because it just showcases how much power Blaire White has to influence people's thinkings on these topics despite her disregard for basic understanding of the power of her platform or desire to use it with any form of personal integrity or standards, and how the size of her platform means that anyone, like myself, smaller than her who attempts to counteract her narratively or even slightly goes against it even without knowing, can be accused of not doing our work, when in reality, Blaire White is the one that is lazily regurgitating misinformation, leading to harassment of creators within the same YouTube space as Blaire who go against her, even incidentally or without knowing. I have seen personally several friends of mine who got harassed for touching upon topics Blaire did despite them doing better reporting or more thoughtful analysis on the topic than White has ever did or ever done. Further, moving beyond Blaire White though, these narratives are used by right-wing folks to directly harass and intimidate trans activists like Eli, hoping to work to pressure activists like her into discontinuing their activism and derailing their careers.
At least by using all of our platforms to amplify this story, we can ensure that whenever anyone Googles this person in the future, potential employers or anybody else, they will immediately see that Eli Erlick is a confessed drug peddler. This is already working. We've already prompted several news outlets, including Fox, to cover the scandal. And we're going to continue because we can make sure that this creep is branded by these admitted crimes for eternity.
Clips like that showcase the weaponization of social justice language by folks like Matt Walsh, who clearly have zero use for it outside of using it against someone, instead of what that language actual intent is, to be used to fight for accountability and people's well-beings. These incomplete or false claims then get reported on by low-rent hit piece sites like Redux, which then get cited by more mainstream organizations like Fox News or the Daily Wire, or cited in casual spaces like YouTube by creators like Blaire White, with the initial reporting being used to obfuscate that the original allegations are based upon incomplete, false, or biased facts. And while I only offhandedly mentioned it during this video, we could go back even further to before the Redux article to point out how a lot of reporters like Anna Slouts will often aggregate these reportings from anti-trans hate forums like gender-critical Tumblr blogs or places like the now non-existent Kiwi Farms, which is where a lot of the reporting Redux specifically got its information from on Eli for its article about her. These hate forums and sites like Kiwi Farms intentionally build these misinformed narratives based on either misinformation, selective facts, or sometimes create the accusations whole cloth themselves. As it should always be noted, the goal of these sites is not to listen to the abused or fight for their voices, but to attack prominent marginalized figures. None of these places' ideals come from an actual place of wanting to uphold social justice or accountability, just a desire to tear a figure down. This then allows folks like Eli and other activists to be described in news articles and headlines in mainstream organizations as, quote, accused sexual abuser, and just offhandedly allow them to state that without any elaboration in order to discredit this person and their work, as well as play into pre-existing transphobic and homophobic prejudices of all queer people being groomers and sexually abusive that is already prevalent in right-wing audiences. It's like a long game of transphobic telephone. And this has a demonstrable effect on people.
So if you want to contact local law enforcement, if you haven't done that yet, I know a lot of people have, you could contact local law enforcement, let them know they have a confessed drug dealer running this prescription drug ring in the city. Maybe they should want to do something about that. I also mentioned that Erlick is a PhD candidate at University of California, Santa Cruz. Now, I said last week that I'd give the leadership there a day to respond and to tell us what steps they would take to address this before I started giving out their contact information. Well, they never did address it, and I was out for a week. So they actually ended up getting a week. And now it's time to escalate. But we should start, I think, with the chancellor of the university, who is Cynthia Larive. And we'll put her contact information up there. Now, you can email her. You can call her. I would start with her. I mean, she's at the top of the hierarchy. She's the leader. So she should be the first one we contact. There's also Peter Beal, who has his pronouns, of course, listed on his profile on the site. He's the vice provost and the dean of graduate studies. So this is a PhD candidate, also a good person to contact. So I want you to call and email these two officials at the university and ask them what they are doing to investigate the confessed drug dealer at the university, confessed felon. If they continue to ignore us, next, I will find the board of trustees and I will find the donors at the school. And we're going to start reaching out to them. And after that, if we still don't get a response, then we're going to show up there with a crowd of people. I'll come there personally because you cannot ignore us. That is not an option.
As we can see, this harassment doesn't just fall out on the person who's being harassed, but on everyone around them. And this is something that people like Zoe Quinn talked about happened to her in Gamergate. Mobs never stop at just the original target, and we'll dig into friends' and families' identities as well. In fact, I have never seen a dox that didn't include someone's families if they had any, and sometimes incorrect family members if they don't. The guilt and shame associated with being the source of harassment for so many people I cared about was honestly worse than anything the mob could have done to me directly. It's never just one victim of harassment campaigns. Even if Eli was actually 100% guilty of these allegations against her, it still wouldn't mean that she should be harassed, nor that people around her should also face harassment as well or be in danger because of it. But this is what happens and is the intentional goal when Matt Walsh and folks like Libs of TikTok attack trans people organizations. It's just to lead their followers to harass these people and to stop any actual activism being done for trans people. All of this that I've been talking about in this video is how the right-wing disinformation credibility generating machine works. A trans person or some other marginalized activist gets the attention of right-wing groups for pushing back against the harm that they cause. As a result, these groups then either dig up dirt that they can place out of context to vilify that person, or sometimes just create it whole cloth out of nothing, making accusations on Twitter or forums like Kiwi Farms. We've seen this happen outside of Eli Erlick, with folks like Zoe Quinn, Lindsay Ellis, or Keffels recently having their own harassment campaigns built upon false or incomplete accusations against them, or just the fact that they're trans or a woman. I mean, hell, if you want to see this exact narrative being put into action again, literally as I was editing this video, Redux posted another story going after Twitch streamer Keffals. Keffals recently had been doxxed, swatted, and briefly arrested due to posters on the dangerous harassment site Kiwi Farms, whose creator, Josh Moon, also literally has ties to violent far-right groups. As a result of this mistreatment by the site, Keffals worked to make a successful weeks-long campaign to stop Kiwi Farms server Cloudflare from hosting the site. And, just to remind you, Redux's founder, Anna Seltz, has ties to Kiwi Farms, having used the sites to help make up other stories about other transgender people as well. Despite not disclosing this conflict of interest with the site, the Redux story posted on September 5th just reports on complete speculation that Keffals didn't want Kiwi Farms taken down because of, the harm and swatting and doxing it causes both to her and to others, but because Kiwi Farms had documentation that Keffals did porn once. On top of this, the Redux article attacks Keffals for doing the exact thing that they tried to vilify Eli for, sending hormones to transgender kids in need. So again, we see Redux using the same exact tactics of sexualizing, misinforming, and vilifying as they used with Eli to retaliate directly against a transgender activist like Keffals, who got attention drawn on them for fighting back against their own abuse and the abuse targeted at the transgender community. Speaking on that though, while I've been mostly talking about transgender women, and specifically a white trans woman in this video, these types of harassment and disinformation campaigns also disproportionately affect trans women of color and people of color generally, who end up being prominent activists as well. And speaking on them, Redux and the folks who run it act like they're feminist, that they care about women and abuse, but it's so clear that all they wish to do with all of their work is tear down trans people and other marginalized groups. And to do so, they wield accusations, both valid and not, like a club, instead of treating them with the care they deserve, as, in some cases, they are very real tales of potential harm. They don't care to listen to victims, that's not their goal. They don't care to try to wrestle with the complex ambiguity of the whole situation and do the work as journalists to fully represent it as best they can with respect, but instead to use it to create a black and white world in which they can wield it to attack a trans activist who they despise simply for being trans. They are not feminists, and they don't even pretend to act like it once you get just below the surface of their thin, spiteful veneer. It's so clear that all that motivates them is hate and disgust. And yet while they hold that hate and disgust as an earnest emotion, it's the same hate and disgust that Matt Walsh builds his own power upon and wields his audience through, and that Blaire White uses herself against her own community in order to get herself simple attention. As you can clearly hear in my voice, I am getting quite angry because I went through all this investigative work in detail, not to provide entertainment or voyeuristic looks into someone's life. Frankly, a lot of the work that I did for this video made me uncomfortable on numerous levels. Uncomfortable for the amount of information, private information that I had to learn about someone in order to get to the truth, as well as the amount of information that really touched upon stuff that I have faced in my own life that I really did not want to fucking feel when I was making this video. But I did all of it to show you the amount of work incumbent upon reporters to do when handling issues like this. Work that no one bothered to do in this case because it suited their agenda. Certainly, if allegations against a public figure just came out, that is worth reporting ASAP. But these allegations against Eli were made years ago, and all the information that I provided was obtainable. And so it's incumbent upon reporters to do that work and make sure if they're reporting stuff that they get it right and don't just like wholesale out of whole cloth say that someone died by suicide and make it seem like that person's suicide was caused by the person that they're talking about, when you can even find out that the person's still possibly even alive. Instead though, Redux did the exact amount of reporting they needed to do to make Eli look bad, but not enough to showcase how threadbare all of the reporting actually was. Deep breath. I think we all needed that. So, initially, I filmed the ending of this video along with the rest of the video that you just saw. And being very open about it, the last few minutes of that recording were incredibly angry. Not just in the words that I used that I had already written out even before I had shot it, But as you could clearly see at the end there, in the feelings that I was feeling during the filming, I think that was pretty apparent right at the end there. And frankly, that feeling of anger, it's not a feeling that I'm unfamiliar with lately. I've been feeling a lot of anger pretty much every day. Part of it's the way that a lot of our social media and world and discourse and everything has been set up so far. And everything that we've been talking about is honestly kind of an outgrowth of that. And honestly, part of that anger is also because I chose to make videos about transphobia and people like Matt Walsh and his film recently. And it's content that I know is important to do, and it's something I have the skill to do, but you can't keep talking about that stuff without it just hurting you inside in some way and making yourself really upset. Making yourself angry at the people who make it, and angry at the people who make that type of content, who push that kind of content, who do these things over and over again to marginalize people, and especially to trans people. The community that I'm a part of and care so deeply about and see so attacked and vilified lately. But even though I choose to make content on that stuff, it's something, even if I chose not to engage with at all, it would be a part of my life, considering where all the discourse is on trans people right now. And so because of that, that's why I choose to direct my skills and talent as a creator and investigator in my neurodivergent brain that spends way too much time hyper-focusing on things that it probably shouldn't for its own health, and why I go after people like Blaire White and Matt Walsh. Blaire White reports on things as facts when they aren't. It may seem like I nitpicked a lot of her video, like just going down to like exact wording that she said at certain points, but when you're talking about things like allegations of abuse and these types of discussions, those tiny details and bits and how you frame things to your audience matter. They matter a lot. I always say nuance is a thing, but nuance is most certainly a thing in these discussions. And yet, Blaire White traffics in these stories with an ineptitude in order to build her social media presence. Certainly, she has probably brought to light some people, but it certainly wasn't with the intention to expose those people, but to build her audience. And as I've shown elsewhere, she's done it with blatant disregard of whether or not the person actually is a problem or not. Yet, while I do have clear issues with her, my anger doesn't really lie with her specifically. My anger lies at people like Matt Walsh, because Matt Walsh does all of this to build his audience up by creating these hate campaigns. The way that Walsh and others like Anna Slouts and many other figures that try to push this misinformation are allowed to portray trans people and other marginalized folks as black and white, good or bad people, it allows them to frame to their audience that by harassing and attacking and going after people that they're doing a good thing. The entire right wing does this at this point. It's the trick that they're trying to constantly pull. It's the trick that fascist narratives and authoritarianism are built on. They create an enemy in their audience's mind, a scapegoat, and make them seem weak and strong at the same time, and then set their audiences off to do their dirty work while those in power reap the benefits. I mean, I didn't talk about it much in the rest of this video since I wanted to focus more on facts and actions, but look at the way Walsh discusses Eli in a really vilified, holier-than-thou manner.
Now, I doubt that you're the country's most prolific illegal distributor of prescription drugs, but you are the one that we're going to make an example of, because we have to start somewhere. Also, Eli, I should note that I just don't like your attitude. I think you need some humility in your life. And I am generous enough to help you develop that virtue.
As if he's condescending to try to beat back a villain in front of his audience, that he's some sort of mythic hero doing this work. And notice how he says things like, we have to start somewhere. Considering he consistently vilifies the transgender community and is using this situation in order to do so, to vilify all trans people this way, that statement has some very dark implications. All of that just makes me so angry. And I don't like being angry. I'm not an inherently angry person. I like to lead with kindness and empathy, not anger. I was trying to think of another word, but that's what it is. I don't like making things out of that. It's not the person I like to be. And I've seen what anger does to even the toughest of fighters, people that I looked up to, fall into anger because of the way that they were harassed and attacked and had misinformation spread online about them from hate forums and all those misinformation campaigns against them. Seeing the anger and pain and vitriol tear someone down, understandably so, because how can you not feel it? Watching all of this, the way trans people are treated, the way so many other people are treated, the way these people build these things, it just makes me angry. And sometimes I just don't know how to feel anything else. As a trans person, and I'm sure for many other folks right now, it's hard not to feel anything but anger looking out into the way the world treats us today. But I always try my best to find the moments of empathy or something better to end on than anger, which is how I originally ended this video on. And so I was looking for that, trying to figure out where to find that hope and empathy in this, and I actually found it when I actually looked at this book that I used a few quotes in this video, and I was sort of looking through it for some quotes, and I found this one. Dehumanization in all its myriad forms addresses the how of online abuse, but it's not the why. What I've seen play out endlessly is an incredibly simple motivation, and one that's constantly overlooked. It sounds absurd, but bear with me. I thought I was the good guy. It might sound unbelievable, but most people in mobs believe this, even while they're doing horrible things. In all my time as an activist, I've never seen a single instance where the people instigating abuse, even in the worst possible cases, thought they were the bad guys. There is always a righteous undertone. Dehumanization works its mental magic, and turning the target into a villain provides the attacker with the chance to be a hero. You can rationalize doing all kinds of things to a symbol that you would never do to a human. The campaign becomes a false battle between good and evil, and tormenting someone is seen as a struggle over something much larger than either of you. That's the key ingredient in the magic trick, in the abuser's mind, turning screaming at a game developer's father into defending an entire artistic medium from censorship. What Zoe Quinn describes there is exactly what these deliberate misinformation campaigns do. They let people commit abuses in the name of being the good guy, because they've been lied to believe that they are. Matt Walsh and right-wing groups create villains out of folks like Eli so they can create some seeming mythic battle for their followers to impose righteous justice upon. She's a sexual abuser, a drug trafficker, she's harming the kids. It allows them to forget that people are human beings. People who may be doing good work and have also been messy and made mistakes, maybe even made huge mistakes. But no matter what, that doesn't mean they deserve this abuse. Regardless of what you think of Eli after all the stuff that I talked about in this video, if you believe that she's a drug trafficker and sexual abuser, or that she's a perfect activist whose allegations against her are completely ridiculous and unfounded, or, like me, you're somewhere in between those two extremes, what she is not is a horrific villain, a monster, an inhuman thing. But at the end of the day, they're just continuing a cycle of abuse and creating victims in all of this, regardless of whether or not Eli had victims or was the victim herself before all of this. We're just not creating more. We're just making it worse, not better. And they do this not just to attack one person, but to attack an entire group of people for their own benefit. We see how the right wing amplifies and misinforms or sometimes even outright fabricates these narratives to be weaponized to discredit other aspects of trans people, the entire trans community, to paint all trans people as abusers, to harass us, to vilify aspects of what we are fighting for as a community, to be seen as human beings in our totality, as ourselves, just as equal and just as valid as anyone else. But instead of doing that, these people instead create a sense in the eyes of their disillusioned watcher and their audience, a sense of purpose or moral certitude that they're able to use to try to tear down not a person in their eyes, but what Walsh and others have made into a symbol of evil. Now, to be clear, I am not trying to wash the hands of folks in these audiences of their abuse, nor am I trying to wash and absolve others of potential abuses. But what I am trying to do in these final moments is to remember that we too often forget the messiness of humanity, that there are no mythic battles, just people, messy people who can cause hurt. And ultimately, those of us who fight to see people as human beings in all of the nuance, while still trying to hold them accountable for their actions, are always the stronger ones. Because it takes so much more work to be able to do that. It's easy to dehumanize. So let me be clear who I do save my anger for. The people who I do wish to hold most accountable for their actions. Matt Walsh, Anna Slouts, and others that I've mentioned don't give two shits about figuring out who the victim of abuse was in these situations, as evidenced by their disingenuous and frankly dangerous inept reporting. This is the goal of right-wing rhetoric, not to look at the nuances of situations like these and try our best to determine what to do, but just painting the gray areas black and white and wielding it to attack a marginalized group further. It's not to stand up for the abused or fight for trans people overall, it's to use abuse for their own ends and to continue the cycle of abuse. And so for them, we want to continue that cycle endlessly. That's who I hold my anger for. For all the rest of us, and even them, I fight more so that we all get seen as humans. Alrighty, everybody. I'm going to make this very, very quick at the end here. This video's already gone way over long. Thank you so much for sticking to this. I'm just going to be honest, this was not an emotionally easy video to make. Not by a long shot. Because of that, I just want to let you know that my next video on this channel is going to be my video part 2 on Matt Walsh's What is a Woman? I apologize that that video took a little bit longer than I had hoped. It was actually originally supposed to come out the day this video was supposed to come out, but between this video that I'm releasing right now, that sort of spun out of it, and also the fact that my editor, who is absolutely amazing, by the way, please go support him. His link is below. Needless, you are freaking amazing. He just had some personal stuff that just sort of caused the editing of the video to be delayed. So just give a shout out to him. He's amazing, and I promise you that Matt Walsh video is going to be absolutely wonderful. I try to make it a lot more fun. There's a lot more like bits and gags and all that thing in that video, even though it will also be on a hard topic like this one was. But that'll be a little bit more fun than this one. But I am going to be taking a little bit of a break after that one, just for a few extra weeks than I normally would between videos, because I need it. And my next video is going to be on something more fun, hopefully. Something a little bit more joyous. I do have some other harder videos that I have in the pipeline, but the next one, I just need to make something for me to feel joy. So apologies, the next direct one will be a harder one too, but again, a little bit more fun, but it will be followed by more fun ones after I take a little bit of a mental health break as a creator. I do want to quick shout out my patrons who do allow me to take those breaks. I would not be able to take mental health breaks for myself without all of you, so mwah to all of you for that. I guess I'll just end on that. I could do the YouTube rigmarole and subscribe and stuff, but that seems stupid in a video like this. I'm very bad at this job. Love you all. Take care of each other. Don't give in to anger. Give in to love and empathy and caring. And on that note, I will bid you all a live long and prosper. Alrighty, the videos I've had to do this month are really crappy and difficult, so I'm very glad that I'm going to be able to do something kind of fun right now, and thank all of my patrons who allow me to be able to pay my bills, who help support me doing what I do. I love all of you. I thank all of you. I could not do this without you. Thank you so much for everything that you give me and the life that you let me lead. It is deeply appreciated. And with that said, an extra special thank you to Catherine Beth, Joe Herman Holt, Karen Allen Foss, Elysia Titivia, Miranda Janelle, Lily Gray, Ashley Allen Bo, Kikio, Jason Nublar, Morgan the Pirate Queen, Stephen Kleinard, Ali Gobert, Jam Shin, Mary Mello, Super Dazzy, Matt Chung, Randy Thompson, Wellington Marcus, Auntie Kate, 808, Boyd and Mary Beth, Earl, D. Casseray, Vincent Ellington, Baba Ruski, Felicia Toast, Joseph Dewey, Chloe Dollar, Elizabeth Christensen, James Krivda, Dominic Noble, Jennifer Fuss, Dnich, hopefully I'm saying that right, Andy with an I, Jessica Wright, Sean McKenzie, Lily Hazel Eyes, Nathaniel Fraughton, Sonia Nero Perdeau, Eric Knatz, Alice Stice, Farangato, Mag, Transit Toronto, Wen, Dizzle Bizzle, Shasha M, Spencer Brownlee, Melinda Walters, Stephen Richardson, W, Randy Edie, Shield Maiden, 4444, awkward pause, Tangy Wilson, Mark the Edge, Pissed into a City Garage, Carrie the Neuroturtle, Cyber Quaker, Drew Batch, Beatrix Purvis, Fox E, Ulysses the Pagan, Willow B, Kevin Freitag, Spooky Heather Sylvia, Sean Piper, Epsilon is Greater Than, Lysa, Martin J. Lowar, Jedi Indiana Jones, Silly Christie, Ajust Odd, Flynn, Sarah Leslie Hutchkins, Gretchen Badger, Jordan Sabers, Sarah Lemero, Patricia Cromshin, Meadow Whisperer, William Stewart, Sky Skinner, Becky Sparks, Blueberry Hill, Sarah Bystem, Zamula Kincaid, Keelis, Jason Knott, Justine, Nathan Steele, Laura Demereau, Burdock Sky, Leo Boyd, Troy Stahl, Here Reeses, Melody and Winter's Good, Jordy Lusso, Blue, Maeve, Celestial Dawn, The Tipsy Changeling, Grumpy Dragon 75, Tony the DC Nerd, Luna T, Holly Walther, Strawberry Pup Tart, Nikki Gordon Bloomfield, Geek Filter, Crit Fax, Michael Godey, Eric Bogdan, Abigail Mary, Unicorn Floof, Bella Lugosi, and James Hodge. You all rock, and I adore you and love you and thank you for everything.